First Liberal casualty.
It is the first, and I think it'll be the only Liberal casualty. I'm very sad about it, but like Shirley Williams at Crosby, it's very difficult to hold these seats which are natural Tory territory, which we win at by-elections, and they did very well, but they didn't quite make it.
Are you going to get the seats that you need?
We're not going to get as many seats as we wanted, but we're winning seats, and that's important.
Did you expect this slaughter of the SDP?
It's not a slaughter. I think the SDP have done extremely well. Their votes have held up extremely well throughout the country, and they're going to be back in force.
Thank you very much.
Simply underlining that Bill Pitt, who was the Liberal victor in Croydon North West, is ousted now. Let's go to Bristol East. Sarah Cullen.
Here at Bristol East, the count is moving towards a close and we're waiting for the declarations. There are strong rumours here, but only rumours that Tony Benn has lost to the Conservatives. Although his Conservative opponent, Jonathan Said, did spend this evening in the count, Tony Benn, after looking around the room, promptly left and has only just this minute come back. Well, we are still waiting. We're told the declaration should be in 2 to 3 minutes. And now back to the studio.
Mary Bailey, 800.
It's Mary Bailey National Front, 800 votes.
Tobias William Hammersley Eckersley,
Conservative.
7,792. Harriet Harman,
Labour.
16,616. Andrew John Soden,
Alliance.
7,006.
So that's it. Harriet Harman, Labour's youngest MP, is re-elected.
I therefore declare that Harriet Harman has been elected to serve as a Member of Parliament for Peckham.
Well, the majority is up there to 8,824. That's almost up to her 1979 figure, or not her, but the Labour member then.
I would like to thank this.
Well, the Conservatives are eating their way through the Labour majorities in the marginal seats that they expected to take, by and large tonight. They've taken both of the Norwich seats. Now, that's the first time since 1970 that has happened. And it does seem that they're making progress in Yorkshire. They're picking up Batley and Spen. And again, they're taking Stevenage in North London. They're taking the new towns there. They're taking the motor workers' places in Oxford East and again in Birmingham Northfield. Well, now, Neil Kinnock.
Well, the next battle starts now. I think.
What is that battle?
The battle is to win the next election, because I think the British people, or sections of the British people, yesterday voted to live on their knees, and we've got to lift them off that.
I'll have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Going to Bristol East for Mr. Benn's result.
Bristol East just about to declare.
In the parliamentary election in the constituency of Bristol East, I, Dudley William Pearce Lewis, being the Deputy Acting Returning Officer for that constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Ernest Hector Andrews,
National Front.
343. Anthony Neil Wedgwood Benn,
Labour.
18,055.
Cheers there from Mr. Benn's supporters.
Gundula Dory, 311. Jonathan Said, 19,800.
So after 33 years as a Bristol MP, Tony Benn is out of the House of Commons.
Jonathan Said, 19,844. Peter Edward Tyrer, 10,404. And I hereby declare that Jonathan Said has been elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
So Tony Benn, who in 1963 renounced the title of Lord Stansgate to sit in the Commons, has lost at Bristol East to the Conservatives, a Conservative gain for Jonathan Said with 19,844 votes. The majority was 1,789 and the swing to the Conservatives 6.2.
Tony Benn succeeded Stafford Cripps in Bristol, and that seems perhaps more than one generation ago in the history of the Labour Party. He has now been defeated in this most surprising and difficult of elections. He had to move from his own seat. This was not the best seat in Bristol. That was denied to him. But he has carried the banner so close to the leadership of the Labour Party, coming so close to being deputy leader, that there's no one in the land who cannot have looked upon his face tonight and seen there something of what perhaps he might never admit, even to himself, the face of defeat. How Mr. Benn comes back, what part he now plays in the future of the Labour Party, these are things for him and his wife, who is by his side, to work out for themselves. It will become known. But the fact that he is no longer an MP, at least for the foreseeable future, means that the whole question of the Labour leadership is now even more open. Mr. Kinnock, what do you feel about Mr. Benn's defeat?
I think it's extremely bad news, and I think that we haven't seen the last of Tony, including in the House of Commons. I think he'll be back, and I think probably in the quite near future.
Now, do you think that was a freak result, or were the voters of Bristol saying something to the Labour Party?
Well, it wasn't an easy seat for Tony to hold. He has been the object of a longer and thicker sustained barrage of abuse than probably any other politician in the land. I think only probably Michael Foot rivals him for the kind of assassination that has taken place. And it's sad that the voters of that constituency were sufficiently impressed by that to cause Tony's defeat.
But you weren't yourself so impressed with Mr. Benn's qualities as a potential leader in the past.
No, the reason was, as I explained at enormous length at the time, that the decision to undertake that contest in the circumstances, I felt wounded the party, and I'm sad to say that I think that events have borne that view out. It's a shame that he stood, and I think that the consequences went to the root of British politics and are partly the reason for the kind of condition we're in tonight.
I think we have Mr. Benn now in Bristol.
First of all, I should like to thank the Chartists and the suffragettes who gave every working man and woman a vote in this country, and every election is a tribute to their struggle. Secondly, I would like to thank the people of Bristol, who over a third of a century have returned me to Parliament, to say how glad I am I stayed, since nothing but the defeat and decision of the people of Bristol would ever have induced me to leave this city. And third, I would like to say thank you to the Labour voters, not only in this constituency, but all over the country, who have stood firm with a very good programme in an election when a great deal has been thrown at them and they have not been diverted from their faith in our policy. Now, I hope that no Labour voters up and down the country will be discouraged by this result. We have 3 jobs to do, whether we are in Parliament or out of Parliament. First, to protect the people for whom the Labour movement was first established. And that task of protecting them will be even more necessary if we have another 5 years of a Conservative government. Secondly, we have to build the Labour movement again, and that we shall do in order to protect people and in order to begin the campaign for the next general election. If I may just say one personal word at the end. I do not believe that politics is about personalities, and I want to make absolutely clear to those in this constituency and elsewhere that what has happened today will make absolutely no difference to my own commitment to the Labour movement, which can be discharged as well outside Parliament as inside Parliament. Thank you very much indeed.
What about the people?
This is the result coming up for Nottingham South, which is a new seat created this time by the boundary
Parliament
commissioners.
for the Nottingham South constituency, held on the 9th day of June 1983. I hereby give notice that the votes cast at this election are as follows. Martin Morris Brandon Bravo,
Conservative.
22,238. Ken Coates,
Labour.
16,523. Raymond Andrew Pointer,
Liberal.
9,697. And I
So
hereby
this-
declare Martin Morris Brandon Bravo is elected as a member for Nottingham South constituency.
So Mr. Brandon Bravo wins this new seat for the Conservatives by a pretty handsome majority. A majority of 5,715.
And here's the result in Birmingham Erdington.
Robin Corbett, Labour, 14,930. Daniel Michael Gerard Moylan, Conservative, 14,699. And so I therefore declare Robin Corbett duly elected to serve as member for Birmingham Erdington.
And that's a very good result indeed for the Labour Party, a Conservative marginal which they have gained. And here's Robin Corbett, the victor.
Mr. Returning Officer, may I thank you and all your staff and the police, both here and those who did the long toil in the polling stations today for all your efforts.
A very small majority for
my agent,
Labour.
Arthur Groves, and the scores of workers in Erdington who
But a
have
Labour
worked
gain.
for this victory. I hope to follow as best I can the record of Julius Silverman in the Erdington constituency, and hopefully for as long as he did. This is
I'm afraid we didn't catch the full figures there, but that is a very small majority for Labour.
And it's a good sign for us, and I'm delighted to be able now to devote my time and efforts to the service.
Yes, that's one that Mrs. Thatcher has let slip. Merely to say that while we were watching Mr. Benn, or immediately afterwards, Mr. Tony Benn losing in Bristol East, his son lost in Ealing North. Now the result in Dulwich.
7. Raymond Anthony Barker, 338. Gerald Francis Bowden, 15,424. Catherine Latavia Hoy, 13,500. Dick Tavern, 8,376. Richard Warren Vera, 99. And I therefore declare that Gerald Francis Bowden has been elected to serve as Member of Parliament for Dulwich constituency. Mr. Returning Officer, I would like to thank you and your staff for the way in which...
Now we have a chance to go to Dundee East, Scottish Nationalist seat up to now.
And this is where Gordon Wilson, the Scottish National Chairman, is waiting to see if he's got in again.
Of the parliamentary election held in the Dundee East constituency is as follows. Charles Bowman, Labour, 15,260. Stephen William Rotger, Scottish Liberal SDP Alliance, 3,546. Barbara Vaughan, Conservative, 7,172. Gordon Wilson, Scottish National Party, 20,000.
Gordon Wilson's back and with a vastly increased majority. Gordon Wilson smiling, steps to the microphone. This is the man who was saying if he didn't win here, the Scottish National Party would be in trouble.
Gordon Wilson to be duly elected.
He's increased his majority from 2,000 to something in excess of 5,000.
Mr. Returning Officer, it is the privilege of the candidate which is successful in an election to deliver a vote of thanks on behalf of all the other candidates to those.
Gordon Wilson has come back. He's had quite a tough fight inside his own party in recent years. He had, of course, to put down something of a revolt on the left wing. And indeed, the redoubtable Margot MacDonald was one of the victims of that, and her present husband. So he is back. So the SNP are certainly not to be counted out in Scotland, even though we have yet to hear from the northeast of Scotland, where they may have a chance of picking up another seat. Simply to say we are hearing the Conservatives have won a seat in Scotland. That's something they haven't done for a very long time. In Renfrew West and Inverclyde, that looks to me like Anna McCurley, who is equally redoubtable as Margot MacDonald, and it does mean that Dr. Dixon Mabon, the SDP man, is out there. Some other remarkable results that we have been getting. Conservatives have held Stirling. They haven't been anywhere close to Stirling for a long time. It's got a lot of Glasgow commuters, that seat. And Michael Meadowcroft, who has been quite a critic of the present Liberal leadership, has taken Leeds West from Labour. Colne Valley, Richard Wainwright is back. Now, that is a real uphill fight, because the way the boundary changes had gone, Richard Wainwright looked as if he had lost that. We'll go now to Mr. Michael Foot at his count.
And here's Mr. Foot coming into the leisure centre at Ebervale, coming into the counting area for the first time tonight. Since he arrived about an hour ago, he's been in a small room off the main hall with his closest aides, watching television, I know, and no doubt following all these Labour defeats with some sorrow. We're expecting a declaration here in 7 or 8 minutes, I reckon. They were aiming at 2 o'clock, but I think that's slipped slightly. But obviously they think it's pretty imminent, which is why he's been brought onto the floor. That's his wife, Jill, on the right, and his agent, Ron Evans, who used to be Nib Evans' agent between them. Mr. Evans there on the right with the pass stuck to his lapel. Jill Foot, whose interventions in this election have been somewhat controversial when she talked about Mr. Foot's imminent retirement. But they've both seemed much more cheerful since they came back to Wales yesterday. But Mr. Foot probably knows that he's not going to be forming the next government of this country.
It's Revolutionary Communist, 54 votes. Conservative,
4,481. Simon Henry Ward Hughes,
Liberal Alliance,
17,185. Hughes, 17,185. Thomas Leslie Keane,
Independent,
50. Susan Caroline Mackenzie, 50. Kevin Timothy Nason,
New British Party,
154. James Stephen Spade,
National Front,
474. John Tilley,
Labour,
12,021. And I therefore declare that Simon Henry Ward Hughes has been elected to serve as Member of Parliament for Southwark and Bermondsey.
So that's a very considerable victory for Simon Hughes. 17,185 votes, majority of over 5,000. A lot of shouting going on here. National Front demonstrators at the back of the hall have been extremely noisy.
Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, in February it was my privilege to be elected as Member of Parliament for Birmingham. Tonight it is my renewed privilege to be elected by even more people as the Member of...
Now straight to Bristol.
Cannot fight a campaign in 3 weeks. It has to be a continuing process of education and effort. And from a personal point of view, I say this most sincerely, and you know I believe it, what has happened today will make no difference whatever to the work that I do for the Labour movement, and I hope that nobody up and down the country will shed any tears for me, but will redouble their efforts to see that what we say, which is good and right, is understood by the majority of the people at the next general election. Thank you very much.
Helping this campaign. Thank you all very much. Yes, thank you.
The Daily Star newspaper. Can we ask you your immediate plans now?
I've made my statement, and I don't think I have anything to add. I've made a very comprehensive statement, and I have nothing to add to what I said to the people here. Thank you very much indeed.
Our commiserations. Can you tell us, did it come as a personal shock?
I've made my statement. You heard my statement, and I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks very much indeed.
I've
made a statement about my future.
Will you be standing for Bristol East again?
Indeed.
How do you
I made my statement.
How do you count for the
More people voted for the Conservative. That's
Mr. Benn, leaving the media behind. 2 losses to the Labour Party. Shirley Summerskill out in Halifax, which she took in 1964 from Maurice Macmillan, and also Philip Whitehead, who did so much in the Annan Commission on Broadcasting, also one of the pillars, I think one should say, of the centre of the Labour Party out in Derby North. I'll lay a lot of money that Labour didn't gain Hereford, as we were telling you just on the screen a little while ago. Looks to me like it might have been a Liberal gain. Alex Lyon has been beaten in York, while his wife has actually won Birmingham Ladywood. That must be the first reverse switch between husband and wife. Now, Eric Heffer in Liverpool with John Snow.
Eric Heffer, Vice Chairman of the Labour Party. First, your response to the defeat of Tony Benn.
Well, I'm naturally very sorry indeed. I've known Tony for many years. We've worked very closely together. He's a great personal friend of mine. We've not always seen eye to eye on every political question, but it's a great loss to the House of Commons. It's not a loss to the Labour Party, because I know he'll be there doing his part in the party, but it's a very bad day indeed, and I feel very, very sad indeed.
But what part can he play now that he's out of the House? Do you see him ever returning?
Oh yes, I'm sure Tony will come back to the House of Commons, and surely there will be seats that will become available, and I'm sure he'll stand them and win, but he will continue to be on the National Executive, I'm sure of that. And he'll play his part in that way, and he has a very great contribution to make to the party, and has made a great contribution. I think it's a very black day, actually, for British politics as a whole.
You kept saying, particularly in the closing days of the campaign, that the opinion polls were wrong, that your own experience on the ground was that Labour was holding up. But it does seem to have been a very black night for Labour.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, I was right as far as Merseyside was concerned. You know, the opinion polls were absolutely ridiculous. We've done tremendously well on Merseyside, the party, but in the country we were wrong.
Eric Heffer, thank you, and back to the studio in London.
I must just clear up the Hereford problem. It wasn't a Labour gain, it wasn't even a Liberal gain. Conservatives have held it. Now, Martin.
430 results in. Let's look at some of the gains that the Conservatives have had in the course of the evening. And first of all, Croydon North West, where Humphrey Mallins is in. Bill Pitt has lost that seat that he took in a by-election for the Alliance, and the Conservative majority there is 4,000. In Derby North, Philip Whitehead, the Labour's arts spokesman, he's out there. The Conservative majority, 3,500, a swing their way of 5.7%. In Dewsbury, SDP, the Labour man who defected to the SDP, David Ginsburg, pushed down to third place there. The Conservatives have taken that with a majority of 2,000. In Ellesmere Port and Neston, Mike Woodcock, who's a company director, has taken that what should have been a Labour marginal, a swing his way of 8.5%. In Halifax, Dr. Shirley Summerskill is out after 19 years in Parliament. The Conservatives have taken that with a majority of 2,000 and a swing their way of 2.5%. And in Hertfordshire West, Paul Boateng, who had hoped to become the first black MP for 50 years, he's pushed down to third place. Robert Jones has taken that for the Conservatives with a majority of 9,500. A swing to the SDP there, pushing them into second place, 10.6%. In Leicester East, the SDP MP Tom Bradley is out, pushed down to third place. Peter Brunvels is in, his majority 933, a close shave there. And moving on from Leicester East, one interesting point about that, Tom Bradley going all the way down to third place there. In Leicestershire North West, David Ashby has taken that for the Conservatives, his majority 6,500, a swing his way of 6.8%. And in Norwich South, one of Labour's industry spokesmen, John Garrett, is out. The Conservatives have taken that with a majority of 1,700 and a swing to the Conservatives of 4.4%. And in Renfrew West and Inverclyde, Dixon Mayburn, the SDP's energy spokesman, is out. The Conservatives have taken that with a majority of 1,300, swing to the SDP of 5.3%, taking them into second place there. And in Sherwood, Andrew Stewart is home for the Conservatives. It's a new mining seat. His majority is 658 and a swing to the Conservatives of 6.5%. Peter.
Now let me bring you up to date with the state of the parties with some 445 results in. This is the position. Conservatives have 262 seats under their belt, Labour 165, the Liberals 9, the SDP 2, the Scottish National Party 2 and Plaid Cymru none. The swing across the country, and you can just see that Douglas Hurd is back at Witney in mid-Oxfordshire. The swing, there's a 3.7% squeeze on Labour, swing to the Conservatives in England. It's 1.4% in Scotland, and in Wales it's 4.2%, that swing. The swing as between the marginals and overall, as you saw before, a 3.5% swing squeezing Labour. In the marginals, it's just the same. It was a little ahead of that before. The swing by English region, in the north of England, it's a 2.4% swing to the Conservatives, squeezing Labour. In the Midlands, the swing is 3.9%, and in the south, it's 4.7%. And if we can take a look at the gains in going across the south, here in the southwest, there are 3 Conservative gains at Swindon, Kingswood, Bristol East, the Tony Benn seat, and 1 Liberal gain at Yeovil. We're forecasting that the political map of the southwest will look like this tomorrow. 42 Conservative seats and just 1 Labour seat left at Bristol South. If we move over to the southeast and do a similar forecast for the southeast, this is the political map of the southeast tomorrow night on our forecast. Just 1 Labour seat left, 105 Conservatives, 2 Liberals, which boils down to, if we put in what's happening in London, our forecast for the London area, we're forecasting Labour to have 27 MPs, Conservatives 55. There will be just 29 Labour MPs out of the 240 seats in London, the South East and the South West. And that is bound to cause some consternation in Labour circles, but not as much as, I think, a political development which we're going to see. Here are the total aggregate votes polled by each party so far tonight. The Conservatives, 7,153,000. Labour, 4,963,000. And the Alliance, 4,226,000. 500,000 behind Labour. Now, if we work it out at votes per MP elected, for the Alliance, it's 528,321. Labour holding Dundee West. For the SNP, it's 104,328. For Labour, it's 38,183. And for the Conservatives, it's 33,744. So you can see that if we look at our forecast, which gives Conservatives 391 seats, Labour 211 seats, and the Alliance 26, of which 21 are Liberals and 5 are SDP, there is at the moment just 500,000, say 600,000 votes between Labour and the Alliance. But there is about 190 seats. And that, I'm sure, is going to be a massive political talking point in the days ahead. We're going straight to Waveney now, Jim Pryor's seat, for a declaration.
The parliamentary election, the Waveney constituency, dated poll the 9th of June 1983. I, the undersigned, being the acting returning officer for the constituency above mentioned, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Name of candidate: Gillian Mary Artis, SDP Liberal Alliance, 12,234. Jack Allen Lark, Labour, 16,073. James Michael Leeds Pryor, Conservative, 30,371.
So Jim Pryor has held on to Waveney, change seat, boundary change with a majority of 14,298. A swing of 7.4 to Conservative.
Leeds Pryor has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
And they're just gathering on the platform now. Mr. Foote and Mrs. Foote are the first there.
Hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Mole, Stuart Gordon,
Liberal Alliance,
29,446. Playford, Clive Ernest,
Labour,
3,208. St. John Stevens, Norman Anthony Francis,
Conservative,
29,824. Wait, Philip David Peel, 127.
Unsatisfied Voters Party. So, Mr. Norman St. John.
And that Norman Anthony Francis, St. John Stevens, has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
Well, a very close run thing here for Mr. Norman St. John Stevens, but he's held the seat with a reduced majority.
Well, there's a whisker. We're going to Bly now, Gwent, for Mr. Michael Foote's declaration.
Given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Atkinson Gareth Martin,
Alliance,
6,488. Foote Michael McIntosh, 30,113. Morgan Stephen,
Clyde Cymru,
Morgan Stephen, 1,624. Morgan Talmai Philip, 4,816. And that the undermentioned person has been duly elected to serve as a member for the said constituency, Michael McIntosh Foote.
So, Mr. Foote has held his constituency with just about the same majority, the notional majority, taking into account the boundary changes, majority
Mr.
over
Returning
23,000. But even here, a 2.4% swing to the Liberals, but still a massive majority for Mr. Foote.
Who have worked for you during this campaign, for the way in which the work has been done. I'm sure that all the candidates agree that it has been done with great skill and fairness, and we would like to congratulate you and thank all your staff for the work that they have done. We would also like to include in our thanks, special thanks to the police for the way in which they have also assisted in the fair way in which our contest has been conducted. And I would like to thank all my opponents in this constituency. I know it is not an easy matter to oppose the Labour Party candidate in this constituency, and I would like to offer my thanks to them for the way in which they've conducted this campaign.
Mr. Michael Foote, and as generous as ever, winning locally but defeated nationally, and now he knows it, and his future remains in the balance to make of it as he will. He has fought his fight. Some remarkable results, not just Norman St. John Stevens' one. I think I may claim to have been his friend for 30 years. I never thought he'd get down to something like 300 votes in his constituency. The boundary commissioners have been nibbling away at him, but he won, despite the local government election results. Nottingham North is a Conservative gain. What is happening in the East Midlands tonight is something that's going to be looked into tomorrow. We have Mr. Cecil Parkinson here. Of course, Mrs. Thatcher is an East Midlands girl, but what is happening in the East Midlands tonight is very remarkable indeed. And the Conservatives have gained a seat at Bridgend, which is the sea coast of Ogmore. In the old days, all the seats flowed down to the sea, as I think Mr. Kinnock will remember. Now, the upper valleys have become Labour seats, a Labour seat, and the sea coast has become a Conservative seat. Well, temporarily, Mr. Kinnock, but in fact, let's take Mr. Parkinson first. Mrs. Thatcher did say at one stage, at the very outset, in fact, of the campaign, that there would be a rough patch in the campaign. Why didn't it happen?
Well, I think Neil Kinnock can probably tell you more about that than I can. I think that somehow or other, in the middle of the campaign, the Labour Party really struck a number of bum notes, and their challenge faded. And I think the challenge we expected from them just never, ever came. In fact, they started to decline.
Mr. Kinnock?
The anti-Conservative vote has been split, and we've seen that dramatically demonstrated in a number of results. Secondly, the difficulty that we had before the election continued into the election, and that was that the alternative policies of producing our way out of slump were obscured both by the press and by the sheer hopelessness of many of the electorate.
Maybe just hear Mr. Foote 1 moment. We'll come back. Mr. Foote now.
And thereby assisted in giving a victory to the government which I believe the country does not want to see running our affairs over these coming years. For the Labour Party as a whole, up and down the country, I agree with those who say that the fight to win the next election starts immediately. We will renew all our strength, we will renew our determination to win, and the Labour movement, the Labour Party of this country, will form the government after the next election.
This is the result for Nottingham East.
Election of a member to serve in Parliament for
seat.
the Nottingham East constituency, held on the 9th day of June 1983. I hereby give notice that the votes cast at this election are as follows. Michael John Bird,
SDP,
8,385. Michael Knowles,
Conservative,
17,641. David Stephen Merrick,
Local Conservative,
1,421. Martin George Morgan Sloman,
Labour,
16,177. And I declare that Michael Knowles is elected as a member for Nottingham East constituency.
So the second of Nottingham's 3 seats goes to the Conservatives. This was thought to be a possible win for Labour by only a small margin, but in fact, Mr. Knowles, who is a leader of Kingston upon Thames Council and a Thatcherite, has won
Mr. Returning Officer,
1,464
you and your
votes.
staff for all the hard work you've done, not only...
Conservatives in Scotland will be pleased to see that they've held Banff and Buchan. That's one the SNP were attacking. What's also interesting is that Warwickshire North, which didn't look like a Tory seat, has been won by young Mr. Francis Maud, son of Angus. And Newport West is another Conservative gain. Now, down at Bermondsey, the man who won the by-election, Mr. Simon Hughes, is there now with Geoffrey Archer.
Well, Simon Hughes, congratulations on your victory in Bermondsey. The Labour candidate did fight back very strongly, though, a new candidate, only just come into the area. Why do you think you still managed to win?
We actually got more votes than we did last time, so that can't be doing bad. We won because we had not let people down in the time since I'd been elected. I was very much a community politician, at work in the community, living there, around and doing what I'd said we'd do, backed up by a local team and giving the change that local people had wanted. They'd had the Labour Party since the war and it hadn't served them very well.
What were Labour voters saying to you on the doorstep about the Labour leadership?
They were very unhappy about the Labour. They didn't see it as capable of forming any form of government, and it certainly didn't represent anything that they could understand clearly. They rejected it as a leadership at all.
From the results in so far, what do you see as the future of the alliance? Only 2 of the gang of 4 have been re-elected. Do you think the alliance will hold together, or will the Liberals go their separate way again?
Oh no, I think that the alliance has different strengths in different parts of the country, and some very amazing by-election results have been maintained by the same people holding their seats at this general election. We're going to meet next Wednesday. We will then plan the next 5 years, and it looks as if this time some of us will have more than 13 weeks to plan for. No, we're going to be working to provide what will probably be the effective opposition in Parliament, because unless the Labour Party does something that I think is beyond it, it will be incapable of providing that leadership, and we're there to take that place.
You don't feel, though, that in your own constituency, Labour will win it back eventually, and you just have it on loan?
Liberals have a good record of not losing seats they win from Labour in by-elections. I think of all the ones who've won since the war, we've only lost back 1. I intend to make sure that I hold this seat for as long as the Labour Party held it when they won it back from us just before the last war.
Simon Hughes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
I think we ought to have a word with Mr. Cecil Parkinson before he goes off to his celebration at Central Office and perhaps seeing the Prime Minister to plan the next 5 years. Mr. Parkinson, is there a secret manifesto? What is going to be revealed in the next week?
The secret manifesto isn't a secret at all. We've declared it. There is only one manifesto. It's the one we put before the public, and it's the one we will implement. And we watched some of the scares and some of the allegations that were made, and we had them compared with the scares and allegations made in 1979. In 1979, we weren't only going to close the health service and do all the other things. We were going to close the National Theatre and Covent Garden, amongst the other predictions. None of those things happened because we just implemented our manifesto, and that's precisely what we'll do this time.
So what is the programme for the coming weekend? When would you expect the Prime Minister to make any changes, say, in her cabinet, if she wishes to do so?
That'll be a matter for her. I haven't discussed it with her at all. She has been concentrating on winning the election, and I will be seeing her when I get back to Central Office, and I expect I'll see her sometime tomorrow to review the election, but whether she has a reshuffle or not will be a matter for her.
I was merely just trying to give a service message to those members of the government who shouldn't leave their telephone. But we are still computing that there'll be a Conservative majority of 138 seats. So some of the rude things which have been said about our computer by Mr. Healy and Mr. Silkin and others, we're going to stand by our forecast. What was your private forecast from your own polls before you came here tonight?
I was actually discounting the polls a little, and I was talking about 130. I thought something between 110 and 150, but my own figure was about 130. And people say, isn't that rather disappointing? All I can tell you is if 4 weeks ago I'd said to the Prime Minister, if we go on June the 9th, we'll have a majority of 130, I don't think she would have believed me. She'd have said I was being amazingly optimistic. So I regard this as a very, very good result for us.
If, in fact, our computer forecast stands up, you're only going to be 8 seats short of what Labour won in 1945. So now Mr. Peter Shaw is waiting after being returned for his seat in the East End. Terry Lloyd's with him.
Peter Shaw, there was a strong alliance push. Just to recap on the figures, if people didn't catch them, you polled 15,740 and the Liberal Alliance candidate 9,382. That, in effect, cuts your majority from something like 13,000 to 5,000.
Well, no, it doesn't, because it's a new constituency. In which, according to some estimates, this was a Labour marginal because of the Liberal penetration in the northern part of the constituency into the council areas. But in fact, they have had a major setback, and of course, I'm very pleased that that has happened.
And pleased with your figures?
Oh, certainly. I think that is a good majority, and it's certainly one that I shall build upon now that I've taken on this newer part of the constituency to add to my old part of Stepney.
Now, you've sat with us for a lot of the night watching results come in. You've seen Tony Benn go. You've seen Joan Lester go. What are your feelings about that?
I'm very sad indeed about Joan. And it really, I mean, it's a classic example of the sheer mischief that the SDP alliance intervention does. Here is a good Labour seat which can be held against the Conservatives, but can't be held only because of an SDP intervention. And what is the net result? It is yet another gain for a Conservative, for a minority Conservative government, having more and more seats with less and less votes.
Peter Shaw, thank you.
We reckon Mrs. Thatcher just needs 15 more seats to win her overall majority. One word about the most impressive result of the night. Gwyneth Dunwoody, come from nowhere, redistributed out of Crewe and Nantwich, has held the seat against the Tories. Now, David Rose is talking to Michael Foote.
Mr. Foote, we compute that Mrs. Thatcher only needs 15 more seats to win an outright majority. Do you concede that she has won this election?
Well, certainly that is obviously true. And I deeply regret it because, as I said when I was speaking a few minutes ago, I think it's a tragedy for the nation that a Conservative government should have been sent back at this election.
But you do now concede?
Well, I concede that obviously that's going to be the result. It can't be changed now.
Mr. Foote, do you accept, as leader of the Labour Party, a personal responsibility for the defeat you now concede Labour has suffered?
Well, of course I've got to accept my responsibilities in the matter, and we will discuss the whole of the election, and I agree with those who said that the fight to win the next election starts immediately, and I will participate in those discussions, and of course I accept to the full my responsibilities in this election.
Do you think it was because of the left-wing manifesto or the left-wing leader?
No, I don't think it's due to either of those propositions, if those propositions are the case. I think it's due to a longer combination of factors, but we've obviously got to look at them because I think it's a tragedy for the nation that a government like this should have been returned. I think it's a tragedy at home. I think it's a tragedy for the unemployed, and for all the reasons that we've stated up and down the country. I think the Labour Party up and down the country has fought magnificently in this election. I've seen it. I've seen how we've fought in so many of the marginal constituencies. We've won several fine victories, but we've also had some very bitter personal defeats, and I'm not seeking to disguise that they are there. Of course they are, and everyone who knows the calibre of the members defeated, I will accept what I say.
Would you feel that this is a difficult election, that you'd steered the party through it? It was an election which perhaps you had to lose, but you've limited the damage, and now might be the time to step down and let somebody else take it.
Well, I'm not making any prophecies about the future leadership. I've been flat out fighting this election to win, along with many people in the party who've given absolute loyalty to me in the fight. I'm not making any criticisms of what they're doing, or what has happened. What I think I've got to do, and what others have got to do, is to sit down now and see how best we go ahead to rebuild the party, and I'm sure there will be a tremendous surge of determination to do it up and down the country, and I will play my full part in that, and I hope to be there in some capacity when we have that next election in order to get a Labour government. And I think what we've said in this election, I believe, will be
prove to be true over these coming years and will help us to win the next election.
But you'll be nearly 75 at that next election.
Yes.
Surely you accept that you won't lead the Labour
Well,
Party into
I
it.
certainly accept that there have got to be discussions about it, and that's a matter for the Labour Party to decide how they go about it. But I'm
When will
sure
that happen?
I'm sure there will be over these coming period. I'm not setting any term on it, but I'm sure there will be discussions amongst those who fought this election together as we have. There will be discussions about how best we can all together set about the task of rebuilding our party. And I think one thing we must have learned over these past 5 years is that the time perhaps of greatest importance in winning us the next election is soon after a defeat in this one. So we've got to learn from this defeat, and I believe that's what the Labour movement will do, because of course the other thing that is proved in this election is it is the Labour Party which is the only alternative to reactionary conservatism, and I believe more and more people can see that. Indeed, the figures prove that.
But hasn't the swing to the alliance all over the country proven that, in fact, the people of this country reject, or a high proportion of them reject left-wing policies?
No, I don't think, if you look at the figures in the individual constituencies, I happen to believe it's the individual fights in individual constituencies where people put their case and have the best chance of hearing it. That's where our democracy is founded, and therefore I don't think lumping together figures all over the country have anything like the significance of what happens in the individual seats.
Is this a time for reconciliation with the SDP? Because they seem to have suffered badly in this election.
There's no possibility of any reconciliation between the Labour Party and the SDP, because the SDP is just a bunch of opportunists, some of whose opportunism has paid, some of whom it hasn't paid off, but all they have done is to injure the possibility of throwing out this Tory government. And so far from any reconciliation with them, I think that they won't play any big part in the future. The Liberal Party, I've always said it, is nothing original and new in my view. The Liberal Party is a different proposition from the SDP, which doesn't have any philosophy, it doesn't have any basis in our politics, and I think this election is helping to prove that too.
You said there'd have to be discussions within the party about the leadership. How would that take place? Surely this is a decision for you to take yourself.
No, it's a decision for us to discuss, and I discuss these matters along with everything else about the way we proceed, and that's the right way to go about it. But I'm sure there will be, as I think anybody who's seen even the statements that have already been made, there will be an overwhelming desire by those who have fought this election together in the Labour Party to use the lessons we can draw from it to prepare for what we're going to do to win the next election. And I believe that all of us can join together in doing it. Part which each of us will play has still to be determined.
Shouldn't you state your intentions quickly to avoid divisions in the party?
I think I should state my intentions to my colleagues in the House of Commons and my colleagues in the party, my elected colleagues in the party, and not on a programme such as this. Great as is my respect for such a programme, of
Finally,
course.
Mr. Foote, didn't you fail to win the argument in this election because of damaging own goals, often scored by other Labour leaders? I'm thinking of Mr. Healy and Mr. Callaghan's interventions.
No, I don't think that is the reason. I think that the causes lie deeper in a sense. I think we had an overwhelmingly the right case about how we could stop mass unemployment. I think we had overwhelmingly the right case about how we could stop the nuclear arms race. I believe passionately in what we said at this election. I agree we've got to say it with the effect of converting people more successfully, and obviously we've got to draw that deduction. But I don't think the deduction is that we should run away from what we said to the electorate. Indeed, nothing could injure us more than if the Labour Party turned its back on the programme which it stated. That would breed cynicism. The greatest danger to democratic politics is cynicism.
But that
I'm
programme's
bitterly
been
opposed to
rejected.
any such cynical politics.
But that programme has been decisively rejected
No, that's
today.
not the way in which British politics work. British politics works, in my opinion, the right way for it to work is for politicians to state what they think, are the remedies for great difficult situations. That's what we've done in this election, and if the electorate doesn't accept it, then we have to look and see the way in which we can present those central truths in a different way. But not to say, here, if you don't like these principles, we'll abandon them and adopt a different set. That's not my kind of politics, and it's not the kind of politics that the British people want.
Mr. Foote, thank you very much. Now back to London.
And just after listening to the leader of the Labour Party, let me remind you of what the Labour Party has performed like tonight. They've gained 11 seats, they've lost 35 seats. Their share of the vote is down 9.7%. the 89 lost deposits, and I think it's true to say that's probably more than they lost throughout the whole of the 70s, probably in by-elections as well. And we're forecasting 210 seats for the Labour Party, 184 behind the Conservatives. A quick summary of what the Alliance have done tonight. The Liberals are up 5 seats, the SDP down 15 seats. Their share of the vote is up 12.1%. They have 11 lost deposits. We're forecasting 24 seats for the Alliance, 20 of them Liberal, 4 SDP. And if we look at the state of the party's map of the UK, there's the results so far in. The Conservatives have 321. That's just 5 short now of winning the election on day one, as we call it, the overnight result. Labour, 186. The Liberals, yes, did you see that? The Conservatives have held Richmond and Barnes, so that was a Liberal seat that they wanted. And the Conservatives hold Clwyd South West as well. Tom Ellis thought he might make a dent there for himself, a SDP defector. Labour 186, Liberals 11, SDP 2, and Conservatives now have gone up to 322, you can see. That means that they're just 4 short of winning the election on day one, and that's never been done before, nor have we ever had 525 results overnight before, which is what we've got at the moment. Let me give you a forecast map, what the map of the UK could look like tomorrow night. We forecast that the Conservatives will have 395 seats in the new Parliament, Labour 210, the Liberals 19, the SDP 4, the SNP 2, same as now, the Plaid Cymru 3, one more than now, and the others, all 17 of them, are Northern Ireland seats, which will be declared tomorrow. The share of the vote nationally tonight, as polled and counted, Conservatives 43%, Labour 29%, the Alliance 26%. And that 29% share of the vote for Labour is its worst performance nationally, I estimate, since 1922, when they polled 29.7%. For the Alliance, it's one of the best performances, I think, probably since the 20s, also since the Liberals started to slip in the 1920s. There are variations between regions. If we look at the share of the vote in Wales, Labour took 36%, Conservatives 32%, the Alliance 24%, Plaid 7%. And compared with 1979, Labour fell heavily in Wales, the Conservatives fell slightly, and the Alliance picked up votes mainly from Labour. And for Plaid, it's been a very negative sort of election, even though we're projecting that they will have 1 more seat. The share in Scotland, Labour took 39% in Scotland, are taking 39% in Scotland, the Conservatives 26%, the Alliance 23%, the Scottish National Party 11%. And that, compared with 1979, means that Labour are down 6.7% in Scotland, the Conservatives down 3.4%, the Alliance up 15.7%, and the Scottish National Party down 5.2%. Let's see where we are with the state of the parties now. The Conservatives need 1 more to win. I'll put in the winning post, and we should have a result which will give Mrs. Thatcher an outright overall majority at something like 25-3 on this Friday morning. Any moment now, a little bit of history, a little bit of psephological history which the Labour Party would rather forget. And our machine will do an amazing trick when this happens, I'm promised, by its inventors and nurturers. The House of Commons will actually light up when Mrs. Thatcher passes the winning post. Let me ask you to do it again for us, and I'll put the winning post again. Let's, well, Alistair, are we going to stay with it, or are we going to go back to you?
Well, we're just waiting for that final seat to come, aren't we, Peter? And, of course, the thing there is it might indeed be Mrs. Thatcher's own seat, because we are waiting for her. And, well, Peter, it was briefly lit up. It wasn't a conflagration or anything like that.
It rarely, lots of lights go on. The only thing that doesn't happen is the division bells don't ring, but we're working on that for the next general election.
Very good. Conservatives have won. We're now told that it has actually happened. Conservatives have won at 236. That is the face of Margaret Thatcher, if you didn't recognise it. And Thatcher back at number 10.
And you see my lights have come on, Alistair.
Peter, I think that's brilliant. Pyrotechnic, I would say that.
Next election, the voice synthesizer will yell out whoopee for the Conservatives.
Ah, well, that means that neither you or I will need to be here. Well, yeah, Peter was saying about Wales. I think what is quite interesting about Wales is the Tories had 2 quite terrible grudge fights going on there. Both went to law, and they've held both Clwyd North West and Bridgend, despite all that was going on. Anyway, Mrs. Thatcher back at number 10, as you've seen, and I think we would perhaps have a word now from the Industry Secretary, Mr. Patrick Jenkin, who has rushed to our side.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Jenkin. I've seen you in Conservative victories and Conservative defeats. This is perhaps the most considerable victory. It is the most considerable victory the Conservative Party has had since the Second World War.
I think that's right. It's, of course, a very major defeat for the Labour Party. It's a defeat, I think, which is entirely attributable to the capture of so much of the Labour Party by the extreme left. I see that Mr. Callaghan has said that the electorate has rejected the defence policy. That is certainly true. I met many voters, lifelong Labour voters, who could not support unilateral defence. I think it was also the anti-common market stance lost Labour a lot of votes in the industrial areas, and I think the results that you were referring to earlier about the East Midlands is an indication of that. People realise that their jobs depend upon our remaining in the common market. And I think also the endorsement by Mr. Foote of some candidates who by no stretch of the imagination could be called democratic, I think has done the Labour Party great damage. And I don't know whether they'll be able to recover, despite Mr. Foote's brave words.
Well, now, Mr. Kinnock, we've been trying to give you a chance to say what the Labour Party is going to do. What is the rethinking going to be about?
Well, the first thing is to properly represent this question of the arguments. As someone said to Michael Foote in the interview earlier, that we'd failed to win the argument. On each of the issues that Patrick Jenkins just mentions, defence, common market, it was a question of the argument being so obscured by the treatment of the argument as to disable our efforts to try and get it through. The arithmetic, for instance, on the common market doesn't add up. If it were the case that remaining in the common market safeguarded the jobs of the West Midlands, unemployment in the West Midlands wouldn't have gone up in the last 4 years by 227%. And on the defence argument, the proposition was not for unilateral disarmament, it was for unilateral nuclear disarmament. And there were very deliberate efforts, both by direct opponents, and I can't blame them for that, but also by the press, to misrepresent what we were seeking to do as a deliberate weakening of Britain, when actually the transfer of resources to conventional weaponry and conventional strength would have effectively modernized and strengthened this country's international defense status. Now, it's those arguments we don't want to cover this election again. But what it boils down to is, as Michael Foote advises, that victory in the next election begins immediately, and that is the single-minded purpose to which the whole Labour Party, and there can be no exceptions to that, must now set itself.
But you've got something to say to that, Mr. Penhaligon.
I'm not sure that right now is the time to go through all the political arguments again. The government's just, Conservatives have got a majority. Just what I do hope is this, is that I do not believe they've got a moral majority, and yet the House of Commons will apparently give them a majority of some 130, 140 seats. They got that on 42 or 43% of the poll, which means the vast majority of the British people in fact voted against them. And I do just hope within the power structure of the Cabinet, which clearly is going to carry on running this country, I do hope they do remember that they have nothing like a mandate for any further extreme right-wing measures in Britain. And one, frankly, can only hope that they will take the result of the British people for what it really is, which is by no means a vote of no confidence. It's a fantastic result, but the result is purely because of our peculiar electoral system. One hopes that the Conservatives will not get carried away with themselves. One hopes the Prime Minister will not get carried away. It's a colossal victory, but it's not a moral mandate to do very much at all.
Well, I couldn't accept that for one moment. As Cecil Parkinson was saying a few minutes ago, our policy is in the manifesto. The idea that somehow, because we've got a majority that's perhaps maybe 130 instead of 44 over all other parties or whatever it is, doesn't alter that one jot or tittle, and it is part of the scare campaign, which I think actually discredited the effect of the other parties during the election. Conservative Party is a very responsible, realistic, moderate party, and we have put our policy on the table, and the electorate has voted in very large numbers